We're interrupting the story to bring you to Wisconsin, Kenosha. Breaking news there, where the governor and other state leaders are talking about recent violence in the city. Let's listen in.
Obviously, the city has gone through a lot of trauma over the last several days, and I had a chance to witness some of the damage that has been done. But the thing that gives me extraordinary hope is the 1,000 people from Kenosha area who are volunteering as we speak to bring water to workers, to paint, do great paintings and spruce up the uptown area. It gives me great hope because at the end of the day, when this is over, the people of Kenosha are ready to make lives better, and they're already beginning in that process. And so I feel very confident about where we're going, but the confidence does not come from Madison or Washington, D.C. It comes from the great people that inhabit this city. They have a lot of pride in what they've been able to do in the city. They obviously understand that there's a need to make sure that we're in a better place racially, and but they're ready to roll up their sleeves, and they're doing it as we speak. And so I couldn't be more proud of that effort on their part. And so with that, I will turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Barnes, and after that, General Knapp, and then we'll take some questions. Lieutenant Governor.
All right, so, excuse me. Loosen this up. Thanks so much, Governor Evers. I am Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, and just want to start by thanking you all for being here, for engaging in this conversation, this still ongoing and much needed dialogue that's happening in not just Kenosha, but communities all across the country. But the facts are that Jacob Blake is still alive, fortunately, after being shot 7 times in the back. And although there is a long road to recovery, we need to acknowledge that this is nothing short of a miracle. And today, Governor Evers and I had a moment to speak with Jacob Blake's family. We met with some leaders here in Kenosha. I had a couple phone calls yesterday with an organizer friend of mine here. We met with some local elected officials, and we also visited a couple businesses. And it was important to do that because in the wake of it all, you see community actually being built. And it is out of some of the most devastating set of circumstances that we often see community being built more holistically, in a more inclusive way, in ways that have traditionally have not happened before. And we see when we have community building that isn't inclusive, you end up with the fissures that you have that create these sort of situations that we're dealing with now. But as the governor said, DCI's investigation is ongoing, but we don't need an investigation to know that Blake's shooting falls in a long and painful pattern of violence. And this is a pattern of violence that happens against Black lives too often across this country. And as you all know, we saw even more gun violence unfold on Tuesday night when 2 protesters were tragically killed and 1 other injured by gunshots. Someone that wasn't looking to keep peace, an outside agitator, someone who came in from Illinois with a rifle, was able to just walk the streets freely like that's something normal that we should just come to expect. Let me tell you, it's not anything normal. We shouldn't come to expect it. We shouldn't accept it. Because what do you think is going to happen if you have an agitated man with a long gun walking down the streets thinking that he's some sort of peacekeeper? And that kind of behavior shouldn't be enabled either. And we have to deal with the devastating results of that. We saw that happen in Louisville already. We saw it happen in Charlottesville. Somebody ran their vehicle into protesters and Heather Heyer was killed. Now, Kenosha, Wisconsin is also home to that sort of tragic scene. We have to not ever want to see that happen again. And I say we have to want because we truly have to have that desire. We truly have to work towards that not becoming the reality of our state. It was painful. It was tough waking up Wednesday. And to see that news, the first thing I woke up to, or the text that I woke up to, it was a friend of mine that said that she was struggling with how to deal with it. I didn't even know what she was talking about. And for some reason, I was up really, really early in the morning. But that was the news that I woke up to. It was the news that so many other people in this community woke up to, a community that's still already reeling from a tragedy. Our broader Wisconsin community continues to reel in from this tragedy. People who are protesting against systemic injustice and violence, people are out there because they want to save this nation. They want to correct the mistakes that have been made over time. Many mistakes that have been made before most, if not every protester was even born. And if we don't want to correct those mistakes, if we fail to correct those mistakes, the problems we deal with going forward are going to be nothing, or excuse me, what we're dealing with now will be nothing compared to what we'll deal with down the line. We have to bring about this change because it's desperately needed. But people need to be able to do so without fear of losing their own lives. And so thankfully this morning, we had that same sort of news. There was the news about tragedy in Kenosha. And we can't afford for that to change tonight or any other night for that matter. That means leaders at every level, elected leaders, community leaders, faith leaders, law enforcement, everybody has to recognize the pain of those who are protesting and have to do everything in their power to work to call out, but not just call out. If you have the power to do more than call out, you should do more than call it out. You should do what you have to do to end systemic racism and the systemic violence that happens every day in this city, in the state, in the country, all over. And then we all have to work to bring our communities together the way that you see it happening downtown right now. And we have to come together and rebuild those broken systems. But I do believe that we can do it. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. This didn't just happen after the Jacob Blake incident. It didn't just happen after George Floyd. This is ongoing. That's one of the reasons why I decided to run for office, because I believe that better was possible. And I hope that everybody in this room also believes that we can do more, because we all have a role to play. Members of the media as well. You have a responsibility to report the facts, report the truth, and make sure that people are educated. And to make sure that things aren't swept under the rug, that make sure that things aren't hidden under a cloak of secrecy, especially as more institutions continue to damage communities. We all deserve more. We all want more. And I know that Kenosha and Wisconsin will get through this. But the only way we're going to get through this, if we get through it together. This great city and this state will endure. And with that said, I am going to hand it over to General Knapp. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Major General Knapp. I'm the Adjutant General for the National Guard for the state of Wisconsin. Here to give you an update on our mission and the mission of the National Guard as we continue to serve in a supporting role to local law enforcement here in Kenosha. The bottom line is similar to what I mentioned earlier today when I talked to many of you, and that is we're here to preserve public safety and the ability of individuals to exercise their First Amendment rights to lawfully and peacefully demonstrate. That's really the bottom line for the National Guard. I think we can do better, and I think that we're here to ensure that there's an environment where we can do better. By the direction of Governor Evers, we're also bringing in additional Guard members, service members from other states. As I mentioned earlier, states of Alabama, Michigan, and Arizona have offered to send their service members, their Guard members here to Wisconsin to assist in keeping the peace and keeping public safety. I want to personally thank those states for sending their service members here to Kenosha, Wisconsin. I also want to reiterate that whether it's the Guard members coming in from other states or the National Guard here, the Wisconsin National Guard, we are not federalized. We're on state active duty. The soldiers and airmen coming in from other states will be under my command as the Adjutant General, and ultimately under the direction of our Commander-in-Chief, Governor Evers. We're working together to continue this important mission in Wisconsin to help the local authorities keep people safe. I want to thank all the supporting states, the law enforcement, local leaders, and most importantly, the community for your understanding and coming together to make this a great place and make Kenosha a place that people want to come for all the wonderful things that it has to offer. And I ask you in the press to help us do that. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll entertain any questions you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, the Sun-Times is reporting that Jacob Blake is handcuffed to his hospital bed. Does that concern you?
Hell yes. I would have no personal understanding why that would be necessary. Certainly, he's paid a horrific price already, being shot 7 or 8 times in the back. So I can't imagine why that's happening, and I would hope that we would be able to find a better way to have him get better and recover than that. That seems counterintuitive. It seems to be bad medicine, and I would say bad restraining.
Governor, there's a video that's circulating. It's gone viral right now of what appears to be law enforcement officials on Tuesday night thanking the teenager who ended up being the shooter that night, who killed 2 people, thanking him, handing him a bottle of water. I guess my question to you is, A, what's your reaction to that, and B, what authority do you have to look into that?
Well, I saw the same thing, and I was concerned. The overriding answer there is, I would like to disinvite all those people that are running around with long guns for no apparent reason to stay home. I mean, I grew up in the Vietnam War era, folks, and there was nothing more important than freedom of speech, and I live that every day as governor. It is so important to have freedom of speech, and when you have outside people primarily, I'm pretty sure of that, running around with long guns. Some of them want to be policemen, some of them anti-police. Is a recipe for disaster, and it's a recipe for us to marginalize that freedom of speech that we all value so much. So as far as what I can do about that, I don't know if that was a sheriff's employee or a city employee. I don't know that, but I would hope that that person would be provide some corrective action and suggestions to him.
If I could just chime in for 1 second too, that's kind of what I was getting at when I said that that's not normal behavior. I mean, these people aren't out here as auxiliary officers. The police have all the support they need from the National Guard. So if in fact that is the case, that this sort of person is being celebrated as a vigilante, as a militiaman, then that's ridiculous. And that speaks to a much larger problem, and it is completely discouraged. And it's more than discouraged. I am willing to, that should never happen. I can come to them. I apologize. I'm just saying that is something that is completely horrifying. If this in fact is, if these armed men who have no connection to even this state, the guys from out of town. So think about how ridiculous that is. Who is he accountable to? Nobody. And for him to even be able to shoot somebody and still walk away from the scene. I mean, they talked about finding a knife inside of the car, not even on Jacob Blake's person, but this guy's carrying around a long gun, killed somebody, just walking freely, was able to get back home to Illinois. Then, we got a much bigger problem on our hands. That's the case.
Yes.
This is for you and for Lieutenant Governor Barnes. It is encouraging to hear that you're upset by what's happening here in Kenosha, I'm sure. But a lot of our viewers are demanding change. I've heard you say that you want change. That change needs to come from the top down. What specifically are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, absolutely. This is critically important, and the previous protests across the state of Wisconsin are absolutely evidence that we've got 400 years of systemic racism in this country, and if we don't do something about it, we'll be repeating Kenosha in cities all across our country and our state. So we need, we need a start, and that's why I asked the legislature to come in session next week to talk about some policing reform bills that frankly have bipartisan support already. And that would at least show the people of the state that we have some interest in this topic. And so I'm hopeful that the Republicans can find the wherewithal to come to Madison for a day. They haven't been there for a long time. And we'll accommodate them the best way we can. But it's a start. We have to show the people of the state of Wisconsin that the political leadership in this state care about this issue. And this is a simple way to do it. So I'm counting on the Republicans to show up on next Monday, take up those bills, debate them, make them better, whatever. But they have to show an interest other than standing back and saying nothing.
Leadership does start at the top, and the governor introduced this package of bills 2 months ago. Legislature hasn't met in 4 months. So I hope that you're asking the same question to the leaders in the legislature, because we have acted.
Governor, Lieutenant Governor, I have a couple of questions for you. One, do you have any indication as to who the people are with long guns? Are they members of militia? The sheriff called them vigilantes. Have you been given any details? And the second question is, do you know whether or not the 17-year-old is charged in 2 murders because 2 people were killed, or if he's only charged in 1?
Well, certainly being state officials and not involved with charging issues, all I know is that the people that are the anguish and the pain in the city, you can feel it. You can feel it even as people were cleaning up today and doing the paintings and those thousands of volunteers. But at the end of the day, we have to do better, and there's pain and anguish because of an incident that should not have happened in this state or in Kenosha. So we have to make sure that we do better. Now, to answer specific questions about charging, that's something for the authorities to take on.
Lieutenant Governor, can you answer the question also about militias? If you all have been told whether or not these are members of militias?
I have no idea. I only know, have seen from the video a person who, I mean, you can make the conclusion that he is some sort of vigilante, a person who thought that he was cleaning up the mess, quote unquote. So that's the only thing I can say to that. I don't know for sure, but it's something that we shouldn't expect. There's nothing that we should accept as normal, and it's ridiculous because you see the outcome of that sort of behavior.
Governor Evers, have you had the chance to speak with the president about the use of the National Guard and just quelling the tension at all?
Yeah, I had a chance 2 days ago to speak to the president and Mark Meadows, both. And they called and reached out to me. And what I did was explain what we had done. We had already brought in the National Guard, and we were already expanding the footprint of the National Guard. And our Adjutant General was already being helpful and looking out to other states to get some help so that we have the appropriate level of support for the people of Kenosha. And I will say flat out, we have...
This coverage continues on CBS in Chicago at cbschicago.com. That's the governor of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, the lieutenant governor, the head of the Wisconsin National Guard, the latest there from Kenosha.
Yeah.